On August 14, the body of Stephen Karkins was found, having been shot in the head and his body still in a sleeping bag. At the time, law enforcement suspected that the case may have been connected to the murders of Edward Smith and Kimberly Diane Lavine, a couple from Kent, Washington who were abducted, murdered, and disposed of in a gravel pit near the Columbia River in March 1985. In October of the same year, his girlfriend, Ruth Cooper, was found dead, a tube sock found tied around her neck. In December of 1985, 2-year-old Crystal Robertson was found at a Kmart saying that her mother was in the trees and not verbal enough to provide any information. February of next year, her parents' bodies were found. The mother was found to have been stabbed 17 times and also had a tube sock tied around her neck. Police theorized that her boyfriend, Mike Reamer, was the killer, as on the dashboard of a truck nearby said, "I love you," and was in his handwriting. However, his body was found in 2011 and the killer remains undiscovered. The murder cases were widely publicized and were featured on the television series Unsolved Mysteries in 1989.
Between 1974 and 1985, 7 couples, 14 people in all, were murdered in parked cars in the hills of Florence. The case was never solved, and it has become one of the longest and most expensive criminal investigations in Italian history. More than 100,000 men have been investigated and more than a dozen arrested, and scores of lives have been ruined by rumor and false accusations. There have been suicides, exhumations, poisonings, body parts sent by post, seances in graveyards, lawsuits, and prosecutorial vendettas. The investigation has been like a malignancy, spreading backward in time and outward in space, metastasizing to different cities and swelling into new investigations, with new judges, police, and prosecutors, more suspects, more arrests, and many more lives ruined. While the killer had not sexually assaulted his victims, in fact he typically avoided touching the body, he mutilated his victims and excised the genitalia of his female victims. He used multiple weapons, typically a gun and a knife. The victims were young amorous couples parked or camped in countryside areas in the vicinity of Florence during new moons. For local men, Stefano Mele, husband of victim Barbara Lacci, Pietro Pacciani, Mario Vanni, and Giancarlo Lotti, were arrested, charged and convicted of the crimes. Critics suggest that the real killer or killers have never been identified. Several other suspects were arrested at various times, but were later released when subsequent murders using the same weapon and methods occurred during their detention.
Udine is province in the northeast of Italy. It's of average size and has some historical significance. Many considered it a paradise. But this community has a troubled recent history. From 1971 to 1989, 13 women, mostly sex workers, were killed in a similar manner. Their cases currently do not have a resolution. 4 victims are officially attributed to the monster, and they are Maria Carla Belloni, killed in 1980, Luana Giampercaro, killed in 1983, Aurelia Januszewicz, killed in 1985, and Marina Lepper, killed in 1989. The manner of killing is often different. Some were bludgeoned, some cut, some strangled, others stabbed, some of the victims were beheaded. All of the confirmed victims of the monster were cut in a similar manner post-mortem. Using a scalpel or some other precision cutting instrument, the killer cut from the rib cage down to the pubic bone, carefully avoiding the navel each time. The cut is said to resemble an S. All the killings occurred on rainy weekend nights. Some believe that the killer was a doctor from the nearby hospital because of the relative clear cut on the bodies and because the incisions are said to resemble a cesarean cut. There isn't much left in the way of evidence. Among what is left is the shawl of Marina Lepper. Her daughter currently possesses the shawl and is still seeking justice for her mother's death.
"11 women went missing over the spring and summer of 1988 in New Bedford, Massachusetts. The skeletal remains of 9 of the women, aged 19 to 36, were discovered near highways around New Bedford. Some had clearly been strangled, others were so badly decomposed that police were left to guess how they had died. All the missing women had led troubled lives of drug addiction, prostitution, and domestic violence, including Nancy Pava, whose sister was a hardworking employee of the city of New Bedford, and Deborah Greenlaw DeMello, who came from a solidly middle-class family but fell into drugs and abusive relationships. Massachusetts State Troopers Mary Ann Dill and Jose Gonzalez were the two constants in a complex cast of city, county, and state cops and prosecutors. They knew the victims, the suspects, and the drug and crime-riddled streets of New Bedford. Kenneth Ponte, a New Bedford attorney and deputy sheriff with an appetite for drugs and prostitutes, landed in the investigative crosshairs from the start. He was indicted by a grand jury in the murder of one of the victims, but those charges were later dropped. Anthony DeGrazia, another suspect, was a loner who appeared to fit the classic serial killer profile: horrific childhood abuse, charming, charismatic, but prone to bursts of violence. He hunted prostitutes in the city by night and served at a Catholic church by day. Still, the killer has never been determined.
From February 1976 to March 1977, in Oakland County, Michigan, 4 children were kidnapped, held for up to 19 days, and then murdered. The killer would then dress them in their freshly pressed clothing, and leave their bodies carefully positioned on blankets of snow or laying in full sight next to a road. The murders resulted in the largest murder investigation in U.S. history at that time, but it failed to produce a suspect. The task force developed a profile of the based on descriptions given by witnesses who saw Timothy talking to a man on the night that he was abducted. The profile described a white male, dark-complected, aged 25 to 35, with shaggy hair and long sideburns. Because the person seemed to be able to gain the trust of children, the task force believed that the killer was possibly a police officer, doctor, or a clergyman. The profile went on to describe the killer as someone who was familiar with the area and probably lived alone, possibly in a remote area, since he was able to kidnap for several days without friends, family, or neighbors knowing. Over 18,000 tips came into the task force, and all of them were investigated. Although there were other crimes that the police discovered while doing their investigations, the task force had not gotten any closer to capturing the killer.
The Paraquat serial poisonings were a series of indiscriminate poisonings across Japan that took place between April 30 and November 17, 1985. The cases remain unsolved. Due to a lack of security cameras in that era, and to the scant amount of evidence, the perpetrator remains unidentified to this day. It is also unclear whether the murders were committed by multiple individuals, or a single individual acting alone. Though these poisonings caused injuries across Japan, the fact that they took place in the same year as several other major events resulted in them receiving comparatively little recognition. Of the 34 incidents linked to the poisonings, a number that includes copycat crimes, 13 resulted in death. It was established that at least one other unknown person attempted to imitate the Paraquat murders by putting lime sulfur into drinks in Tokyo. There were also a small number of people who attempted to poison themselves in a method imitating the murders. In each instance, the poison was mixed in drinks that were then placed inside vending machines. The spiked drinks were generally found inside the machine's dispensing slots. But there are also examples in which they were retrieved from the top of or under the machines. The killer used paraquat and diquat, hence the name.
The Pitui's Park murders are a series of 13 murders of gay men committed between February 2007 and August 2008. The murders took place in Pitui's Park in Carapicuíba, Brazil, and were perpetrated by an unidentified killer dubbed the Rainbow Maniac. The victims, all gay men, were aged 20 to 40. All but one were shot, 12 of them in the head. One died from blows to the head. The last victim was shot 12 times. According to Brazilian media, the park is in an area frequented by prostitutes. Police dubbed the killer the Rainbow Maniac, a reference to the gay pride flag. The first murder occurred on July 4, 2007 and the last on March 15, 2009. Officials from the São Paulo State Public Safety Department announced that the killer could be a state police officer. On December 10, 2008, police arrested a retired state police sergeant, Jairo Francisco Franco, based on witness statements implicating him in a murder that occurred on August 19, 2008. A witness claims to have seen Franco shoot a black gay man 12 times that night. Another witness told police that Franco often visited the park to look for gay men and victims. On August 23, 2011, Jairo Francisco Franco was released after the trial, having been declared not guilty by the jury by 4 votes against 2.